Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. Nancy was happy. Farewell, the wilderness. Farewell, native village, in which a girl knew so little joy. Nancy is getting married. Robert, a successful businessman and simply a solid man, takes her to the capital. It was like a fairy tale. In the heat of an abandoned village in Colorado, a jeep rolled up, and an imposing man of about 37 got out and asked the young girls, Nancy and Lisa, who were going to the well to get water, "Girls, is there a place to stay here?" Then something clicked in Nancy's head. This is my chance. A chance to get out of the cursed, slumbering provinces, which I have always dreamed of. And the girl said in a friendly voice to him, "Are you looking for a place to stay? There is no hotel in our backwoods, but we have a spare room at home. I don't think my mother would mind." Lisa nudged Nancy in the side. "What are you doing? Do you know this stranger?" "Get off," Nancy hissed. "Maybe I'm catching my own happiness." "Yeah, catching your own happiness." Lisa defiantly turned away, and the man held out his hand to them. "My name, by the way. I would love to stay with you." Nancy was drenched in paint and trembling sweetly. "Come then, I'll show you out. And let's go." On the way, Robert had a heart-to-heart talk with Anna. He was incredibly gallant, friendly, courteous, and in a few minutes said 3 or 4 really nice compliments to Nancy. Oh, it really was like a movie. Nancy and Robert reached the house. "Who was that sweetheart you brought?" Wendy, the girl's mother, asked in a sullen voice just as she came out on the porch. Nancy was embarrassed. Robert, the innkeeper, came to the rescue and explained everything himself. "Mother, I have to stay in your village for 5 days. Nancy said you have a spare room. About money, I think we can agree. I don't like to be stingy." Hearing about the money, the old lady softened. All right. Nancy's mother bloomed like that. Nancy thought with annoyance, "Why are you so greedy?" But the annoyance immediately passed, because when she showed him to his room, his mother began to gather on a chair, saying, "Now we will feed the gentleman good and ask about everything." Soon the table was breathing steam. The potatoes. Mom chopped onions and fish and invited Nancy and Robert to the table. Robert praised every piece he sent into his mouth. "Say, Robert," asked a straightforward Wendy, "why have you come from Los Angeles to our godforsaken backwoods?" Robert smiled slyly. He looked first at Nancy, then at her mother. "And my business, dear ladies, is very serious." He took a sip of tea from his cup. "But tell me, what is it?" Wendy insisted. "And the thing is, I'm a bride." Nancy's fiancé's chest nodded, and Robert launched into a long argument. "We have the wrong girls in Los Angeles, losing their innocence early, going to nightclubs, smoking, and generally behaving inappropriately. Would a missing girl like that make a faithful, loving wife? No. And I know my worth. I want a faithful, dignified wife who will bear me a healthy child." "Yes, a healthy child. That's a prerequisite. Do you expect to find the right girl in our village?" Wendy asked. "Yes, I swear to God." "And you will." "At least my Nancy, Mother," Nancy exclaimed. And she thought to herself, why not? Nancy didn't drink, didn't smoke to her health, didn't complain. I met all the criteria that Robert had, she thought. She also genuinely liked this personable man. Wendy was not used to keeping her mouth shut. Soon the whole village knew what Robert had come for, as did the fact that the businessman seemed to. Sympathetic to Nancy, Wendy's daughter. Visiting Nancy rapturously were Lisa, the girl's best friend, and Kevin, who was considered Nancy's fiancé, though she had no particular feelings for the poor tractor driver. "Nancy, what are you doing?" Lisa asked. "Why," Nancy answered, pale and trembling. "You are doing a very silly thing, getting mixed up with Robert." "Why should I? He buys you like a cow on the market. Like, prove that you don't drink or smoke. And if you can't give him a healthy baby, I will." You're just jealous Robert didn't look at you. And then the hitherto silent frown came up. Kevin, you don't know this man at all. You can't trust him. And she just brushed it off. Robert paid her more and more attention every day. Today he picked bouquets of her favorite flowers for her. Tomorrow he gave her a set of cosmetics brought from the city. The day after he drove her in his Jeep to the regional center and bought her gifts. I'm sure my mom will like you, Robert Nancy said. You haven't told me about your mother yet, Nancy remarked. Emily is her name, Robert answered. She lives with me. Don't be afraid of her. If you really are a modest girl, my mother will like you. That's a prerequisite too. My mother will like you. Nancy's face stretched like too many conditions. Nancy thought, but the desire to escape the harsh little motherland was stronger than any skepticism. On the fourth day, Robert took Nancy to the regional center again. This time not for gifts, but for a checkup at the hospital. The girl underwent tests, showed herself to the gynecologist, weighed herself, underwent x-rays, and received a certificate that she was completely healthy. Robert was satisfied. When they left the hospital, the man got down on his knees and said, Nancishka, will you agree to be my wife? Of course I will. Of course I will. Nancy clapped her hands. She tried not to think about what would have happened if the results of the examination at the hospital had not satisfied Robert. On the fifth day, he threw what he called a feast for the whole world. The whole village was invited to the feast. From the regional center by order of Robert, they'd brought raw meat, exotic fruits, and other delicious things. The engagement of Robert and Nancy Jones was officially announced. Lisa was also present at this rendezvous, where expensive whiskey and rum poured down the river. Only the bride and groom did not drink. Robert was a desperate teetotaler. Nancy tried to match her future husband, also a saint. Kevin cursed quietly, but he was not squeamish about a glass of good rum or a piece of bacon. And Lisa sat sad and looked at smiling friend Nancy. What a fool, marrying the first man she met. He would give her a sweet life. Drunk, Kevin went to fight with Robert, but the groom didn't even look at the troublemaker. And the boys dragged him away. The tractor driver away. The village was partying late into the night, and in the morning Nancy packed her things and got into Robert's car. Goodbye, my darlings. Wendy waved a handkerchief. When you visit us, don't forget, I'll be sure to come back sometime. My daughter promised. But in fact, she was not eager to return to her native village, not even for a short time. Los Angeles was ahead of her. A brilliant life, a happy marriage. Robert and Nancy drove all day, and by evening, they wrapped up at the Road Hotel. Robert got a room with a double bed. He dropped his suitcase and told the bride to settle in. The bride and groom snuggled up next to each other in 2 bedrooms. Nancy became uncomfortable. It was her first time lying in the same bed with a man. Don't be afraid. Robert smiled predatory and began to stretch her dress. He did without the foreplay. Roughly enough, he took off her clothes and looked at the girl. Are you really good? I was not mistaken about you, and it wasn't just awkward anymore, but scared. Robert was acting like a wild, unbridled beast. Nancy realized it was better to be submissive by satiating her lust. Robert fell asleep and wheezed. The girl cried softly. This was not how she had imagined her first time with the man she loved. There were no tender kisses, no quiet declarations of love, no timid touches. It was ugly and rough. But why? Why nothing? I tried to reassure myself. Nancy, I will talk to Robert. He is gallant, understanding. He will change his behavior toward me and become gentler. In the morning, Robert opened his eyes, and as if not noticing Nancy's eyes swollen with tears, he smiled, rubbed his bride's hair, and sang, "Good morning, beloved. Good morning." He squeezed out Nancy. Isn't it time for breakfast? Robert ordered lunch straight to the room. Eggs, sandwiches, and juice. The man was amazing again. Offered his bride the best bits and pieces, speculating about how good it would be to spend time with Nancy in Los Angeles. Do you like museums? I've never been to museums, Nancy admitted. We'll definitely go, Robert promised. What's the shopping like in Los Angeles? Can you imagine? Nancy smiled. She was ready to forget the night's humiliation. Robert and Nancy were on the road for a few more days spinning the wheel. The groom chatted cheerfully with his bride, talking about how he would take her to museums, planetariums, movies, and shopping malls. By mid-afternoon, Robert and Nancy would stop at some roadside restaurant. Robert would pay generously for the tastiest delicacies. Nancy rejoiced. My fiancé certainly wasn't stingy, but her mood was changing. As the sky began to darken, Robert would slow down to the nearest hotel, usher Nancy into her room, humming a song, undress, and commandeer into the bunk to please her husband-to-be. After an hour of rough treatment, Robert fell asleep. Nancy cried tears of humiliation, but she reassured herself again. It's all right, but I'm going to Los Angeles. I got out of my dreary backwater. Robert can't take advantage of me every night, and then I'll give him a child, and he'll be kinder to me. So Robert and Nancy made their way to Los Angeles. His apartment was on the first floor of a fancy new building. It was a luxurious 4-room apartment with a leopard skin hanging on the wall. There were palm trees in the areas, captivating to the eye, paintings, and expensive appliances, from the vacuum cleaner to the coffee machine. But how did my lovebirds get there? Robert and Emily's mother met the arrivals. The old woman tried to speak politely and friendly, but Nancy grew cold under the gaze of the woman, who seemed to the girl like a witch. Emily, in turn, looked around Nancy from head to toe, took even the chin, and said, "And you're really not bad." "That's right, that treats me like a cow in a bazaar," Nancy thought with resentment. Or so Robert remarked. I'm no fool to choose a bride. I didn't like that line from Robert. It felt like it wasn't the first time he'd really chosen a bride. "Please come to the table," Emily said. She served shrimp soup, cookies, bread, and a second roast. After dinner, Nancy went to rest in the room provided for her. The girl fell asleep. She had unpleasant dreams. A dark forest. Blood. She was running away from Robert and his mother. When Nancy woke up, she thought to herself, "That's a dream. I should be glad I was in Los Angeles, that I was going to live like in Christ's pocket. And I'm having these horrible dreams. I'm such an idiot." And so began Nancy's life in Robert's house. Strangely, Robert never talked about going to get a marriage license. He would just come to her room every night and stay with her until morning. When the girl hinted that it was time to formalize the relationship, Robert easily replied, "Sure, we'll do it in April. I can get pregnant 10 times before April." With despair, thought Nancy, but she didn't dare object to her fiancé. Nancy thought a stern woman like Emily would chase her Nancy around the house, bog her down with housework. But Emily did everything herself. Nancy's attempts to help her. Strange. How strange, Nancy thought. In fact, all she was required to do was drink and eat and please her fiancé at night. And Robert made a habit of it. "Persuading me to have a healthy baby. I need an heir, and you take me in marriage." In her mind, Nancy replied, but aloud she dared not argue with Robert. And so the days flew by. Then one day, Nancy felt she was pregnant. She felt nauseous. She craved salty foods. Often she had to pee. Soon a round belly appeared. Robert and Emily were overjoyed. "Soon we'll have a son or daughter," Robert said, stroking his bride's belly. Did Emily say, "I'm going to be a grandmother, a grandmother." That's so great, but something didn't seem right. The joy of these people, whom she strangely enough still knew very little, seemed insincere to her. Worse, as time passed, Nancy began to think that the child was in danger. What is this maternal instinct? Or was I going crazy? To talk to her fiancé, still not her husband, Nancy hesitated. She didn't believe him. Nancy spent most of her time in her bedroom, eating and sleeping. She was already glad that since her pregnancy had become apparent, Robert had stopped prying with intimacy. Robert and Emily paid little attention to Nancy now and talked only about the baby all the time, sickly, some angry, sometimes Nancy. They were interested in the baby and didn't care about the mother. One day she was lying in the dark in her bedroom when she heard a muffled voice through the wall. "Don't you think it's about time?" proclaimed Emily. "I agree. You can already show her to the customer," answered her mother, Robert. "According to the ultrasound, it's a girl. Our idiot wants to name her Jenna," smirked at Emily. "Jenna." Robert laughed disgustedly. "The customer we sell the newborn to doesn't care what the little cunt's name is. It's up to the customer to decide on organs or adoption. It's his own business. We just want the money. A lot of it." Nancy almost screamed when the ominous meaning of the words Emily and Robert reached the girl's mind. She understood everything. This was what Robert and Emily needed a child for, not to raise and nurse their heir. No, Robert had bequeathed baby Jenna to Nancy so he could sell her for organs. He made that clear himself. I wonder how many girls Robert has done this to. How many babies from different girls has this bastard sold? That's what a lucrative business he's in, Robert. Unless, of course, Robert is the bastard's real name. No, Nancy won't let little Jenna fall prey to the traffickers, and she won't go missing either. After all, there's no telling what has become of those poor people born to this scoundrel. How lucky is it that Robert's apartment is on the second floor? Nancy packed her bag with the essentials, medicine, her passport, and her cell phone. It was counting down to seconds. Nancy opened the window and climbed out of the bedroom and into the street. There was no need to jump. She still remembered climbing trees as a child, grabbed hold of a pipe and deftly climbed down. A girl from the country can still do more than that. It is hard. And with nervous exertion, she headed toward the subway. Nancy's heart was pounding frantically. To save herself at all costs, to save herself. To save her baby Jenna, the girl walked and cried. Passers-by turned on her. She went down to the subway, and here she felt calmer. Among the masses of people moving in all directions, if Robert and Emily, those creepy ghouls, had already missed Nancy, they wouldn't be on the trail anytime soon. For an hour Nancy rode the subway. Going up to the city, she found herself at the bus station. She bought at the window the last ticket for the bus to her home village. Half an hour later, the bus left. Nancy looked at the big city floating by over the bus and cried. This was what the village readers longing for a beautiful life in the capital had turned out to be. 3 days later, Nancy got off the bus at the regional center, caught a ride to her home village. At the wheel sat a familiar cab driver, James. Oh, did you recognize James the girl? No way to bullshit. Yes, Uncle James. It's me, answered Nancy, and was angry with bitter tears. You're stuck with your rich husband, aren't you? Asked James. Yes, quarreled so as not to reveal the awful truth. Dutifully confirmed Nancy. During the 3-hour drive, James retold the village gossip. Told him that Lisa had married Stephen, and that Kevin still couldn't find his way. Can't forgive himself for losing his bride. He's been drinking a lot. Nancy listened and cried. She asked him to stop at the well. She walked home from there. Finally, she knocked at her mother's house. Who's there? Wendy looked out, and when she saw her own daughter, suddenly she was like a chicken. What are you doing here, silly? All alone, without a husband, and with no husband. He's not my husband. Nancy cried. He deceived me. He told me the awful truth in a nutshell. I never want to see you again. Wendy swung the cleek. Go back where you came from. Go to your husband's feet and beg his pardon. You ungrateful wench. Nancy cried even harder and slowly wandered away wherever she was going. Lisa, that's who would understand Nancy. Lisa had been against Nancy leaving with Robert from the beginning. Losing her tears, Nancy wandered to Stephen's house, went up on the porch, knocked on the door, opened the frowning. As always, not talking Stephen, Nancy. He made square eyes. Lisa home. At home, wife. Well, come on in. Since you came, what's up? Nancy jumped up Lisa, seeing her friend. Why alone? Where's your husband? He. Nancy cried again. Well, sit down, have something to eat and tell me all about it. There were potatoes, pickles, and even a bottle of whiskey on the table. Nancy poured herself a full shot and tipped it inside. Nancy, you're pregnant. Lisa worried. You shouldn't be drinking. After what I've been through, I'm allowed. Nancy replied and repeated. So listen, for an hour Stephen and Lisa, not breathing, listened to a terrible story, Nancy. Nancy laid out everything in detail. What will you do if Robert comes looking for you? Stephen asked. He will rush to the village first thing. We have to call the police. Lisa glowered. To the police, to the police. Rudely, Stephen teased his wife. What if this rich guy has everything, and the police will listen to him, and not Nancy? And that's right, Lisa sighed. The news that a pregnant Nancy had been seen in the village went around all the villagers. People streamed to Stephen's house. It was a pilgrimage. Only Nancy's mother did not come, who still thought that her daughter had quarreled with her husband for some nonsense and had only come to embarrass herself. One of the first to show up was tractor driver Kevin. He was tipsy. What happened? He turned to Nancy. Your little bastard didn't suit you. I told you. You should have married me. Stephen sent Kevin away so he wouldn't do anything stupid when he was drunk. So Nancy stayed with Stephen and Lisa. Stephen went to work every morning. A friend stayed with Nancy at all times. The friends discussed what to do now, but they couldn't agree on anything. Actually, it's not right that you went back to your home village. That's where Robert will be looking for you, Lisa reasoned. I know that myself. She agreed sadly. But tell me, where else in the whole world would be waiting for me and my mother did not take me? And Nancy again cried. She was tormented day and night by the fear that if Robert really came, he would grab her by the hair and drag her into the car. Nancy would not have the strength to resist. There was only hope for the village men, who would not let the girl get hurt. And one day Nancy's nightmare came true. She woke up to a car pulling up next to her house. Not just one, but 3 cars. Robert got out of the first car, which was so familiar. From the second, doctors in white coats from the third. Police officers in full uniform. Stephen said it right. This scoundrel has everything under his belt. Nancy thought longingly. Hold on, my friend. Lisa took Nancy by the hand. Stephen was not at home. Robert, accompanied by a policeman and a doctor, went up to the porch and knocked on the door. Nancy, honey, open up. Robert's voice was sweet, like the wolf in a fairy tale who, imitating his mother's goat, asks to open. What do you want? In my house. Lisa asked angrily. Do not even think. Open the door. Citizen Lisa, there is a citizen sheltering in your house who is not quite mentally healthy. And I tell you, Nancy, healthy. It's Robert you should be treated for inflammation of cunning and deceit. What are you talking about? In an old voice, the doctor urged. Nancy, open up. Robert repeated. I won't hurt you. You are pregnant. You shouldn't be nervous. Slowly, the residents gathered around the porch. What is going on? People were staring at Robert, at the cops, at the doctors. They've come to get my dumb girl. Oh, this is disgraceful, isn't it? Wendy clutched her head. It's all right, dear mother-in-law. Robert put his hand on the old lady's shoulder. Meaner than Nancy will she be at her best. Taking his place again on the porch of Stephen's house, as on the podium, Robert loudly announced to the citizens of the village, my wife Nancy has lost her mind. She imagined that I might do some harm to our unborn child. She has to go to a psychiatric hospital right away. People stood around, talking, believing and not believing. The truth, says Robert. No, not the truth. So the police are with him. What do you want with the police? Kevin, not quite on his feet, emerged from the crowd. He stormed off at Robert. Hey, you bastard. I told you to leave my girl alone. Robert gave Kevin a scornful look. Kevin went for a fight. But 2 police officers arrived and quickly grabbed the tractor driver and dragged him to the car. The crowd became convinced that Robert had the upper hand. Voices rang out in the crowd. "Come on, Lisa, open up. Let the husband and his wife figure it out." "I won't open it," Lisa snapped. "You must open the door." The doctor and the policemen in charge voted in unison. Citizens dismissed. Another policeman announced over the loudspeaker, "Nothing to see here." But the crowd was in no hurry to disperse, anticipating the spectacle. "Get away from my house." The shameful cops snapped from behind Lisa's door. "Choose your words, citizen," barked one of the cops. The policeman piled on and kicked down the door. The doctors burst into the house and soon appeared on the porch, dragging the crying and defiant. From their arms, Nancy Lisa jumped out to help her friend. "Ah, you werewolves in white coats." Lisa bit one doctor painfully, then another. Then she almost vomited Nancy out of their arms. Then Robert jumped up and dragged Lisa away by the scruff of her neck and threw her to the grass. Robert, the police officers holding Nancy, and the doctors loaded themselves into cars and left the village in the direction of the regional center. "Ed mothers, what will happen now?" cried one old woman and crossed herself. Lisa, who stood up, swore, "What in the world? You bastards, you ghouls, you bastards." "We did not protect the girl," said a local guy nicknamed Tall. And Lunched felt sorry for the tractor driver. People shook and shook some more, helped Lisa to fix the door and went away. In the evening, Stephen returned from work. He listened somberly to his crying wife. Going from corner to corner, kept repeating something must be done. Must do something. Otherwise, the villains will beat the girl. And I'll have a separate conversation with Robert for pushing you. But no matter how angry Stephen was, he couldn't figure out what to do. Meanwhile, the cars were finally entering the regional center. We pulled up in front of the city psychiatric hospital. Nancy was taken to an office. There were several policemen, several doctors, and a nurse present. "You know, this man," pointing them at Robert. The doctor with the big glasses asked. "I know." Nancy confirmed, muffled. "Your husband?" "No marriage certificate." Also muffled, answered Nancy. "Are you pregnant by him?" "Yes." "So why don't you go back to your spouse?" "Again, we are not married. He is not my husband." "Well, okay, he's not my husband. But what's the point? It doesn't make any sense." Because the girl couldn't take it anymore and started crying. "Tell us, what's troubling you?" Nancy tried to be strong. For the baby's sake, Jan wiped away her tears and said in a firm voice in Robert's presence, "Unless, of course, Robert is the man's real name. I won't say anything." The doctor with the big glasses sighed heavily. "All right, Robert, you go ahead. We'll call you." And the patient must be escorted to the room. The nurse, a nice-looking girl, took Nancy under the elbow and led her out of the office. "Let's go, let's go." The nurse introduced herself as Christina. She escorted Nancy to her room. "Get some rest." Christina gave her an injection, after which the girl instantly fell asleep. That's how Nancy ended up locked up in the asylum. It was simply scary here. She was among crazy women who did terrible things. Some were running naked through the corridors and screaming, twisting the nurses' arms and tying them to cats. Others mumbled something indecipherable from corner to corner and sometimes molested Nancy. "God will curse you. You know God will curse you. God will crush you." The most harmless sick people sat with their mouths open, drooling out of them in the recreation room in front of the TV. And they didn't understand at all what the screen was showing in this bedlam, and it was hard not to go crazy herself. Nancy was most afraid for little Jenna, how the nervous environment wouldn't hurt the fetuses. Every day the doctor came to the girl and started the same conversation. "Do you know who Robert is?" "Yes, he's my ex-fiancé. Would you like to go back to him?" "No." "Why not?" "He's dangerous." "Dangerous to me and to little Jenna." "No, you're wrong. Robert loves you and your unborn child." "But I heard the conversation." "What conversation?" "Robert and Emily were discussing giving the baby up for organs. Believe me, it's your fertile imagination. No, doctor, no. Nurse, see the patient out. A sad Christina came into the room and led Nancy to her room. Sometimes in Christina's gaze, Nancy caught a glimpse of sympathy, and the daily bedlam continued. Smoking was forbidden in the ward, but patients would sneak cigarettes. The nurse would swear, search the patients upside down. Turn the beds upside down in search of forbidden ones. Nancy didn't smoke, but she was humiliated along with everyone else. In order not to really lose her mind, the girl took it upon herself to help the nurse clean the toilets and move the canteen. She was even praised. The most frequent doctor remarked, "Have you taken up community service?" "Yes, doctor. Do you feel better?" "No, but I'm not crazy. When you have recovered, we will hand you over from hand to your fiancé and the father of the child." "Tell me, doctor, when I give birth, what will you do?" "Naturally, the baby will be given to the father." The doctor's answer made Nancy despair. Robert, the bastard, had calculated everything perfectly. He would take Jenna and leave his fiancée to rot in the asylum. With Jenna in his arms, the bastard returns to Los Angeles. That's where Robert and Emily will sell the baby. He's already got a client. He's waiting. Nancy didn't know what to do. She didn't know. But something had to be done for Jenna, and the girl made up her mind one day. She stood guard, and in the hallway of Christina, the only person who, in the chaos of the psychiatric clinic, inspired confidence. "Christina, can I talk to you?" Confused nurse. "Well, please, what do you think of our doctor?" "You know, he's a bit old-fashioned. I mean, he treats in an old-fashioned way. He doesn't really listen to his patients. Between you and me, Christina, tell me, do I look like a patient?" "Not really. You can listen to me from the beginning without interrupting." "Well, I'll try." "Thank you, Christina." And Nancy spoke. She recounted in great detail how she had dreamed of a fiancé from Los Angeles, how that fiancé had snowballed on her head, in Robert's face about how rudely he had behaved, treated the girl in hotels. Nancy wasn't silent about that either. All the weirdness of life in Los Angeles with Robert and Emily. And finally, overhearing sinister conversations about everything. Nancy told in order how she escaped to her native village and was caught. "Do you believe me, Christina?" The nurse sighed. "I don't know whether to believe me or not, to be honest." "Christina, I'll ask again. I look like a mad woman." "No, you don't. Now think about what would happen to my daughter if they gave her to Robert." Christina sighed heavily. "It makes my hair stand on end at the thought. So what should I do? Tell me." She and Christina looked at each other on whether the nurse will believe the crazy patient now depended on the lives of two creatures, Nancy and little, not yet born Jenna. And Christina made up her mind. "You know, I'll help you." "Really?" Nancy got excited. "I'm not sure it's going to work out. But so what? I've got a brother who works in CID. I'll try to talk to my brother." "Thank you, Christina. Thank you very much." Shortly after talking to Christina, Nancy got another call from the old-fashioned doctor. "You are about to give birth." "I know," answered the poor girl hoarsely. "It would have been better if you had come to your senses before then." "I do what I can, doctor. You see, I can't put you on strong medicine so as not to harm the child, but it's about your sanity." "Doctor, excuse me," Christina stormed into the office. "What now?" The doctor grudgingly grimaced. "The CID is here to see you." And the nurse inconspicuously winked at Nancy. Step into the office came a brave officer in full uniform and introduced himself as Captain Mason Adams of the Criminal Investigation. "I'm looking for a patient of Nancy's. She is in front of you," reluctantly replied the doctor. It has come to our attention that Mason did not finish his sentence and looked intently at the girl. "Are you sure, doctor, that she is insane before you?" "Yes, I'm sure," the doctor exasperated. "Now I'll have to insist on an independent psychiatric examination at another clinic." "Why is that?" "Because, as Mason said, I'm sure she's not crazy, but she's in danger from a creepy recidivist." The doctor jumped. How? He was ready to throw himself at Nancy with both hands, but on the same day she was taken to another clinic. Robert, fortunately, was not there. The friendly psychiatrists administered a series of uncomplicated tests, asked Nancy a few questions, and then reported back to Mason. We consider this girl to be quite sane. That's good. Mason smiled for the first time. Nancy thought what a beautiful smile he had. In the police car, Mason took Nancy to the Criminal Investigation Department. In a cozy office with yellow curtains, where for some reason plush crocodiles were planted on shelves, Mason began the interrogation, more like a gentle interrogation. Tell me, Nancy, where did you first see Robert's face? He came to our village to look for a bride. Well. Mason tapped his pencil on the table. And he liked me. Did you like him? Nancy was embarrassed. How can I tell you? I just really wanted to get out of our neck of the woods and into Los Angeles. And then what happened? I'll tell you everything. But don't make fun of me. How's that for a laugh? Sadly, Mason smiled. And Nancy said all the things Christina had said the other day about agreeing to be Robert's bride, about the torture in the roadside hotels, about Robert and Emily's strangeness, and finally, about the scary overheard conversation and fleeing to her native village. Will you also say that I dreamed this conversation? Doomedly, Nancy asked. Mason looked at the girl seriously. I will say that you have miraculously escaped from a dangerous criminal. Do you believe me? Made square eyes, Nancy. I wish I didn't believe you, because it's so vile and wild. But it's a fact. And Mason told we've been on the trail of this creep for years. Robert, Stephen, Russell, whatever he called himself. He finds girls all over the United States, tries to conceive a child with them, and then sells the child to who knows where. He gets rid of the child's mother in the most brutal way. God knows how many victims this executioner has on his conscience. And his own mother, Emily, that's not her real name, helps her son in everything. That's how they make millions. Nancy grew cold. She felt sick. Don't worry, Mason reassured her. You're safe now. Can I get you some water? Yes, please. No, you'd better call a doctor. Nancy suddenly fell from her chair to the floor. She went into agonizing contractions. The doctor shouted with all his might at Mason, but the policeman himself was not confused. Put out the stew. How much strength do you have? Moaned poor Nancy. It's premature labor. Put it out, you'll be fine. And so little Jenna was born. Mason stood, smiling, holding the baby girl wrapped in a towel and showing her to a tired and happy Nancy. Congratulations to you, Mother. Now I'm going to take you to the hospital myself. And Robert was afraid of Nancy. Don't worry, your room will be secure. Thank you. Thank you. Nancy was driven in a car with tinted windows to the hospital across town. Mason accompanied the mother and child. He personally made sure the room was comfortable and instructed the doctors to take care of Nancy and her baby. Leaving the hospital, stopping at the police car, Mason pressed his lips together, fumbled for the gun in his holster, and wondered why such a dangerous criminal as Robert was still walking free. The case was clearly not clean. There's a lot of confusion. Robert has obvious connections in the authorities. Money gets his way everywhere. Not for nothing did Nancy say that a caravan of police cars came to pick up the girl from her hometown, where the poor girl was hiding from the monster's fiancé. Mason called the supervisor. Hello, Jacob. I'm right on the tail of this maniac. I need backup. On the tail of the tail in front of the warden teased. How long have I been hearing this? Adams. This time the case is right, Mason exclaimed with conviction. I found the woman who and Mason succinctly told him what Nancy had handed him. Jacob hesitated. All right. Adams persuaded me to ask for Los Angeles. But the young officer was sure to capture the repeat offender, and without waiting for backup, Mason got in his car and rushed to the mental hospital where Nancy was summoned. As he ran down the steps, he ran into his sister Christina. Well, Well, Christina didn't understand. Robert didn't show up. Everything is fine. Running past his sister, Mason whirled into the doctor's office. Young man knew again, almost without hiding irritation, said the doctor in large glasses. Listen to me carefully, Papa. Mason began. If Robert shows up and asks about Nancy and the baby, don't tell him the woman isn't in the hospital. Let him think Nancy's here. Whatever you say. The confused doctor muttered, Oh Lord, your works are marvelous. Half an hour later, a team of operatives arrived and set up an ambush at the psychiatric hospital. Try to take the bastard alive, Mason admonished the fighters. Another group of policemen went to Nancy's home village. Here's the thing, how many police? The villagers wondered. Something will happen, Stephen said. A senior operative approached Stephen as the most serious man in the village and said, We are catching a dangerous criminal known as Robert. Are you ready to assist us? What about her? Asked a worried Lisa. The girl is safe. Well, thank goodness. Stephen smiled and hugged his wife. The two ambushed Stephen and Wendy's house in places where Robert was more likely to show up. The whole village was in earshot. The operatives had no way of calming the people down. They would make so much noise. We won't get the culprit for sure, complained one of the policemen. What did the bastard turn out to be? Nancy's fiancé. Kevin, the tractor driver, made a noise. I told you beforehand I should have been married. Grief finally broke the man. Having lost hope of being with Nancy, he completely drank. The operatives checked the weapons once more and waited. Robert might not show up at all. Meanwhile, Mason puzzled over the question of where in the regional center Robert was staying. He had to be careful not to frighten the culprit away. After distributing Robert's description to the plainclothesmen, Mason sent them out to the hotels. To search for the bandit, he himself joined one of the groups, combing their hotels. Jacob, assisting his subordinate, called Los Angeles. Hello, colleagues. I think I have something on that scary old lady Emily. Well, arrest her. Emily was sure of her impunity. For so many years, she and Robert had been running black ops, and she always got away with it. The old woman knew how to clean up after herself, as she called it. She and her son never left any evidence. Meetings with clients took place in the most unexpected places. The child was handed over to the client like a cat in a bag. After that, Robert literally vanished into thin air. And the apartments where Robert brought the next girl were different each time. This time, greed has blunted the old woman's sense of vigilance. Let's return Nancy, and there she will move to a new address. We can't let such good money go to waste. The son should be back from Colorado soon. Emily thought everything would go smoothly. But this time, the old woman was very much mistaken. The doorbell rang. Emily was just waiting for the plumber. And with that, she got off the couch and went to open the door. Laying her hands on her head at the door, the old woman barely had time to open it. A task force burst in. Two were already twisting Wendy's arms, though she was hardly capable of resistance. It wasn't over yet. Undaunted, Emily thought. She was sure that she and Robert could not be proven guilty. At this time, Robert was unaware of Mason's actions. The perpetrator, too, had let his guard down as he lay in his hotel room. He dreamed of the fabulous millions he would make after selling baby Jenna. Jenna smirked and thought the rascal was a fool. Nancy even managed to give his product a name. Secretly, Robert was a little sorry to have to straighten Nancy out. She's a pretty girl. She could have had my babies every year. We'd sell them together. Yeah, it's kind of a shame. Robert got tired of waiting. He decided to go to the mental hospital and get Nancy. That fool is going to have a baby soon. On his way out of the hotel, Robert didn't notice two trim men in plain clothes interviewing the maid. So Ben quietly said to his partner, "Quickly and discreetly follow this man." Robert got into his Jeep and drove in the direction of the psychiatric hospital. Mason and Ben followed in the car. Robert drove to the hospital, got out of the Jeep, and walked briskly to the doctor's office. Upon entering, he said, "I want to see my fiancé." You have the right. The doctor with the big glasses answered in a slightly trembling voice. In fact, I would like to take my fiancé home. You have the right. How embarrassed, the doctor answered in a single voice. Robert seemed suspicious. The criminal's instinct for self-preservation woke up. Is Nancy here or not? I have to make sure. The nurse will show you to your room. Quietly, the doctor says. Rubbing the glasses of his glasses, he looked at the pale Christina nurse. Robert became even more alert. Shivering like an autumn leaf, Christina led him in the direction of the room. Don't move. Robert heard Robert behind him. Fucking ambush. He realized and darted to the side at the same time, grabbing his gun from his hole in the throat. The operative's bullets flew near Robert's head. Christina cried out in fright and fell to the floor. Robert fired back. One of the operatives folded in half and collapsed on the floor. How was that? Robert grinned. You can't take me. Several more shots rang out from both sides. Robert grabbed Christina and, using her as a human shield, began making his way toward the exit, underneath Mason and Ben, who were driving through the hospital's main entrance. They heard gunfire. We need backup, Ben said. Unhook the hospital building. The perpetrator is clearly inside. Should we get on it? Mason answered. Where am I going? Ben was confused. But Mason only waved his hand. There are people in danger. We must not hesitate. With the gun in his hand, Mason sprinted toward the back door of the hospital. At the sight of the operatives, covering himself with Christina, Robert continued to make his way toward the exit of the ward. Suddenly, a young policeman rose from the ground in front of the perpetrator and struck Robert on the head with the butt of his gun. Mason, crying Christina, fell into her brother's arms. The operatives had already taken the stunned Robert. Overjoyed, Mason had already called his supervisor. Jacob, the criminal, has been taken, just as I promised. And I have good news from Los Angeles, answered a satisfied chief. They caught the wild old lady, Emily. Mason called his assistant. Give the command, stand down the boys who are in the village. And you still can't prove my guilt, yelled Robert, who was being led away to the police car. You got nothing on me. We'll see, Mason gritted his teeth. In fact, he was very much afraid that Mason stayed in the psychiatric hospital next to his slightly calmer sister Christina. What were you thinking about, young man? A doctor in large glasses approached Mason. The criminal, as I see it, has been caught by the criminals, corrected Mason. In Los Angeles, they caught the mother and the accomplice of the trafficker of newborns. So what are you sad about? I'm afraid they'll get away with it. We have almost no evidence, just Nancy's testimony. Young man, I can help you. As I write to my colleague in Los Angeles, bring him in to question the criminals. I'm sure the professor will get these men to confess. He's a big expert on maniacs. Thank you, doctor. Thank you. Christina came up to her brother. Mason, what about Nancy? Nancy, the boy exclaimed, rushed to run down the corridor. Christina and the doctor looked at each other silently, smiled, and shrugged. Half an hour later, Mason entered the room where Nancy was lying with the baby. Mason lit up the girl. What's wrong with you? You have an abrasion and your sleeve is torn. It's nothing. Mason waved his hand. It's great news. Robert's been arrested. He won't hurt you anymore. Thank you. Happy tears spurted from the girl's eyes. Mason's cell phone ringtone came on. Jacob's boss called. Mason got serious and took the call. On the phone, what are we going to do? Soldier, Robert and the old lady are being questioned, but they can't be cracked. The tough nuts deny everything. I got an idea. Jacob, I'm listening. Invite a psychiatrist from Los Angeles to take part in the interrogation. He's an expert on maniacs. He can help us. I've heard of him. Did someone put you up to this? No, I didn't. I figured it out on my own. Cheerfully, Mason laughed. Nancy looked at this amazing hero, with whom she had already fallen in love, and rocked baby Jenna in her arms. Would it really be all right and proper? The professor's method worked. Robert and Emily confessed. Now the perpetrators go to jail for life. Mason and Nancy were soon married. The wedding took place in Maiden's home village. Everyone cheered and congratulated Nancy. Lisa and her husband Stephen were especially happy for their friend. Wendy reconciled with his daughter and happily started her little granddaughter Jenna. The only one who might not have been happy was tractor driver Kevin, who congratulated his former lover from the bottom of his heart. He unexpectedly had his eye on Mason's sister nurse Christina, who attended her brother's wedding. "Let me give you these flowers." Slightly already drunk, Kevin drove up to Christina. "Permission granted, sweetheart," Christina smiled. "Only if, Kevin, you plan to take care of me. You need to be treated in an archaeological hospital." "As you command, my lady." And Kevin really took to his senses. Soon the tractor driver was unrecognizable, so he became sober. On top of that, he took up sports. 6 months later, they had a new wedding in the village. Kevin married Christina. The nurse left her job at the psychiatric clinic and moved to live in the village. "Always dreamed of being close to nature," said Christina to Mason and Nancy, who often came to visit the newlyweds. By that time, Nancy had given birth to Masona to 2 beautiful twin boys, and then Christina gave birth to Kevin's beautiful daughter. About Robert, there were a lot of rumors going around about them. How were they doing behind bars? The last time Mason made inquiries, it turned out that Robert had fallen ill in prison with a serious, incurable disease and had died after suffering for several years. And Emily went crazy, banging her head against the walls. She kept raving that her victims were coming to her in their dreams. But Nancy didn't want to remember that terrible part of her life and those horrible people who had almost ruined her and the baby kitten. She was happy, she was loved, she was happy with her babies, and that was all that mattered to her.